Welcome to the Sky Commander Flight Brief. It's your mission-ready podcast for drone pilot training and aerial insights across Canada.
From Transport Canada rules to real-world drone ops, we break it down, take you higher, and help you earn your wings. Because here at skycommander.ca, we don't just fly.
It hints there's more to it. It's a masterclass, a deeper level, maybe a philosophy or a community focus, perhaps.
It's definitely intriguing, sets them apart from just, a basic tips show. Skycommander.ca is the obvious next step. Precisely. If you're thinking about flying a drone in Canada, boom, this content is aimed right at you.
Powered by skycommander.ca.
The elite podcast for Canada's drone pilot. Okay, let's get started.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep into the invisible infrastructure that is fundamentally enabling the future of autonomous flight. We're talking about geofencing and virtual railings and beyond visual line of sight, or BVLOS operations. And you really need to forget the consumer app that just, flashes a warning zone when you fly your quadcopter over a park.
Right.
We are analyzing the professional grade systems that are literally drawing the lines for regulators in the sky.
That is the crucial pivot point. It really is. For high-stakes professional BVLOS, especially as the global industry aligns toward robust regulatory frameworks like the FAA's proposed Part 108.
For the really complex operations.
Exactly. For those, the fence is not a suggestion. It is a high-grade, engineered, auditable risk control tool.
Auditable. That's the key word there. Our mission today is to move past that simple concept of a no-fly zone and really analyze geofencing as the professional grade system it's meant to be.
Yeah.
We need to understand how these software boundaries become critical, auditable evidence of risk control that you have to present to the FAA, or a pipeline operator, or an enterprise client.
And what's fascinating here is the massive shift in mindset this requires.
How so?
Well, the fence isn't just a technical convenience anymore. It's a detailed, demonstrated behavioral contract that proves you can keep your highly automated aircraft inside a pre-approved volume.
A behavioral contract. I like that.
We're going to look at the geometry of containment and really how software boundaries are converted into evidence of operational discipline.
Okay, so we've got a lot of ground to cover. We'll examine the advanced taxonomy of fences, what makes a fence hard versus dynamic, and why GNSS accuracy, or maybe its imperfection, should terrify and simultaneously guide your operational planning.
It absolutely should.
And crucially, we'll dive into the math behind calculating your safety buffers and the smartest ways to design your emergency contingency geometry so you don't build a trap for yourself when things go wrong.
And the central idea you need to take away from all this is that geofencing is really the foundation of airspace assurance. It ensures the aircraft stays inside approved areas, away from known conflicts.
It makes loss link predictable.
And it's the key regulatory mechanism for proving that your BVLOS operations are safe and scalable.
Let's start with that fundamental meta-truth of responsibility, because this feels like the first place where corners get cut in planning.
Oh, for sure.
Many operators, especially those coming from smaller scale, visual line of sight work, they quietly treat geofencing like a legal shield.
They do.
They believe that if the software fails and they cross a boundary, the software is somehow liable.
And that is absolutely the misconception we need to dismantle right now.
So that's just wrong.
Completely wrong. Geofencing supports compliance. It does not, under any circumstances, replace operator responsibility. Under the FAA's proposed BVLOS framework, the one being defined through the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, the NPRM, the operator, remains fully and ultimately responsible.
So responsible for what, exactly?
For defining and operating within an FAA-approved operating area, period.
So if I submit an operations plan to the FAA for, say, a 20-mile powerline corridor, the FAA isn't just rubber stamping my map.
No, not at all.
They're approving the entire system of risk control I've designed to keep the aircraft inside that boundary.
Precisely. The regulatory requirement, which is anticipated explicitly in the NPRM, is that operators must submit the operating area boundaries and the characteristics of those boundaries for approval.
Characteristics, what does that mean in practice?
It means detailing the ground hazards, the airspace classification, the necessary safety buffers, and the entire containment plan. The geofence is simply the technical tool. It's the digital lock you install to enforce that regulatory boundary.
And if that lock fails?
If that lock fails, the fault lies with the operator's inadequate risk mitigation planning, or maybe a lack of maintenance or testing.
So in an audit, the regulator isn't just checking the polygon on my map. They're checking my documentation that proves my buffer zones are sufficient, that my loss link logic respects the boundary, and that my internal procedures mandate strict adherence to that geofence.
Absolutely. The safety case hinges on that proof of adherence. And this brings us to a huge shift regarding manufacturer versus operator responsibility.
Okay.
Historically, OEM geofencing, the built-in systems, did the heavy enforcement. But that landscape is evolving globally.
What's the major change we're seeing, say, with the big manufacturers?
We're seeing a shift toward aligning OEM geofencing with this principle of operator responsibility. They're replacing a lot of the hard proprietary enforcement restrictions with enhanced warning systems.
So less of a hard no and more of a, hey, be careful.
Exactly. These systems present official, often real-time FAA airspace data rather than enforcing some proprietary manufacturer-defined no-fly logic. The message is clear. The manufacturer provides the advisory data, the operator builds and enforces the operational geofence.
So if I'm tracking this, my BVLOS safety case just can't afford to rely on the manufacturer's system to save me from violating controlled airspace.
That's the core takeaway. Their systems are increasingly becoming advisory layers. You must integrate the aircraft's onboard capabilities with your operational discipline to enforce your FAA-approved boundaries.
The operator owns the containment strategy.
The operator owns the containment strategy, the buffer calculations, and the testing procedures that demonstrate the fence works as promised.
Okay, so let's unpack this responsibility within the context of the whole BVLOS ecosystem. Because geofencing is the local guardrail, but it operates inside a much bigger traffic management system.
It does.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because the proposed BVLOS approach isn't just pilot plus drone. It's what people are calling a system of systems.
That's the perfect phrase for it, and understanding this layering is vital for compliance. Geofencing is really just one piece of a very complex puzzle.
Okay, so what are the other pieces?
Well, if we look at the components the FAA is emphasizing, it starts with, first, the operator-defined operating areas. We can call that the box. And that's what geofencing enforces as strategic containment.
Okay, the box. Then you have the fundamental building blocks of operational awareness.
Exactly. You need aircraft built to consensus standards and, crucially, remote ID plus lighting. That's the drone's digital license plate for real-time visibility.
Right.
Then you layer on detect and avoid, or DAA. This is where the complexity increases, and it's so important to differentiate DAA from geofencing.
What is the specific functional difference there? I mean, when does one override the other?
Okay, so think of it this way. Geofencing is strategic containment. Its purpose is to keep the drone inside the pre-approved volume.
Got it.
DAA, on the other hand, is tactical collision management. DAA is designed to detect and avoid dynamic, objects-manned aircraft, birds, unexpected obstacles that might appear inside your approved volume.
So DAA is working inside the geofence.
Yes. The geofence is the higher authority for boundary adherence. If the DAA system detects an obstacle outside the mission box but inside the safety buffer, it executes an avoidance maneuver. But that maneuver is still fundamentally constrained by the hard boundary of the regulatory edge fence.
So DAA can't just decide to leave the approved area to avoid something.
It can't. If DAA were to attempt an avoidance maneuver that breached the regulatory edge, the system has violated its primary safety requirement.
So DAA manages local traffic within the lines, but the geofence draws the inviolable lines.
You've got it.
And the top layer of this system of systems is the high-level traffic management from automated data service providers, or ADSPs.
Yes, ADSPs, often operating under the proposed Part 146, are the airspace-level guardrails. They manage separation between multiple BVLOS drones at scale, and they coordinate strategic separation from manned aircraft by providing real-time advisories.
So geofencing is my property line, and the ADSP is kind of like the city zoning board.
That's a great analogy.
To make this manageable, let's introduce the foundational three boxes model for this containment geometry. This is a simple mnemonic for BVLOS planning.
These three boxes define your entire operational discipline. First, you have the approval box.
The big one.
The widest boundary, the FAA-approved, legally defined operating area that considers all the local risks.
Okay, then inside that is the mission box. This is much tighter.
Right. The mission box is your planned corridor plus the altitude band you intend to fly within. It's the optimized, tightest volume where you actually conduct your task. It lives well inside the approval box.
And the third, which is essential for auditability and safety, is the contingency box.
This is the predefined, pre-assessed, and geofenced volume where the drone must go or remain when communications degrade, power fails, or something unexpected happens.
Because you can't assume perfect comms.
Assuming perfect comms is negligent. The contingency box is your plan for when the comms link is lost. These 3 boxes, approval, mission, contingency, they form the geometric backbone of your entire geofence setup.
Okay, so now that we know why we're building these fences to contain those 3 boxes, let's look at the actual functionality. We need to move beyond thinking of the geofence as just a static polygon on a screen. Let's start with the fundamental distinction between hard and soft fences.
A hard fence means the autopilot physically vetoes pilot input or external commands and forces a predetermined automated action.
What kind of action?
It could be preventing the aircraft from exiting the boundary, triggering an immediate return to home, or executing a safe landing. It is an absolute barrier.
And a soft fence.
That provides progressive warnings, prompts, or requires pilot acknowledgement before proceeding. It allows the pilot or automation some discretion in the response.
Okay, but if we agree that a hard fence is what saves you from making headlines, why would any serious BVLOS operator choose a soft fence that allows pilot discretion near illegal boundary? Isn't that just sacrificing safety?
That is a critical challenge. The reason you might opt for a soft fence is usually to avoid a larger secondary hazard.
Like what?
For instance, in complex inspection environments, an immediate rigid RTH triggered by a hard fence might inadvertently guide the drone into a power line or a building that the pilot can see but the automation can't.
I see.
A soft fence warns the pilot they're nearing the boundary, forcing them to take over and manually navigate around a microhazard while staying within the broader approved safety buffer.
So they're more for internal management.
They are high-discipline tools, often used by experienced flight crews for managing low-risk internal zones or in testing environments.
That distinction makes a lot of sense. So hard fences protect the regulatory edge from uncontrolled error. Soft fences manage nuanced local operational risk inside the approved area.
Exactly. But for critical high-consequence boundaries, like the edge of Class B airspace or a nuclear facility, hard enforcement is mandatory, no question.
Let's move to the time element. Static versus dynamic fences. A static fence is pretty straightforward. It's a fixed box defined for the entire mission.
Right. That's for stable, simple corridors. They're the baseline.
But the real scalability comes from dynamic fences, right?
Absolutely. The real safety benefits come from dynamic fences. This is the smart, performance-based approach required for modern, large-scale BVLOS operations because they allow the fence geometry to shift based on external or internal triggers.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's detail those specific triggers.
Yeah.
How does a fence actually move?
It shifts based on environmental, operational, and system health inputs fed back into the flight management system. The most common triggers are environmental thresholds.
So weather.
Weather. If the system detects rising wind speeds or gusts that exceed the drone's certified performance margin, the operational boundary, the mission box, automatically shrinks away from obstacles, or the system forces the aircraft into a safer loiter pattern.
What about operational triggers?
Operational triggers are key for managing connectivity. If your command and control link quality degrades below a specified threshold, say, it drops below a 98% packet success rate, the dynamic geofence logic immediately tightens the boundary.
So it's proactive.
It's proactive. Instead of waiting for a total loss link, the system shrinks the operational volume to the smallest, safest core, often pushing the aircraft toward a pre-cleared hold zone where the link is known to be stable.
So it's ensuring predictive behavior instead of a reactive emergency response.
That's the goal. Other triggers include GNSS health flags, which we'll get to, and battery state, calculating if there's enough juice to reach the current operational edge.
So dynamic geofencing is essentially automating the pilot's risk calculation mid-flight, making sure the operational envelope always matches the current performance.
It ensures performance-based safety, which is central to scalable BVLOS. You demonstrate to the regulator that your automated system can instantly mitigate risk when performance degrades rather than relying on human response time.
This level of sophistication brings us to the concept of layering. It's not one fence, it's fences inside fences. We call these highly specific route-constraining boundaries virtual railings.
Virtual railings are the mission-specific geofences that create a guided corridor. They make the BVLOS route feel like a track the aircraft must follow, keeping it precisely where you want it, and, more importantly, keeping it off the areas you haven't assessed for risk.
The most robust planning strategy uses 3 specific rings of containment. Lay out that three rings model for us.
We call this strategy B containment. The outermost layer is the regulatory edge fence. This is the hard, inviolable line. This is the true edge of your FAA-approved area, and a breach here is a clear regulatory violation.
Okay, ring 1. The crucial protective layer is ring 2.
That's the safety buffer fence. This is the margin you build inside the regulatory edge. It accounts for everything that can go wrong. GNSS, positional uncertainty, worst-case wind drift, aircraft control latency.
All the stuff we'll talk about in a minute.
All that stuff. This buffer ensures that even if you have the worst-case error, you remain inside the regulatory edge.
And the bullseye. The true center.
The innermost ring is the mission fence, the operational fence. This is the smallest, tightest box where you actually task the drone to do its job.
And having these three layers means a minor drift only triggers a warning.
Right. It triggers a warning at the mission fence, an automated turnback at the safety buffer fence, and it never breaches the critical regulatory edge.
We also need to talk about smaller, granular fencing inside the mission box, microfences.
Microfences are essential. These are small, localized no-go bubbles around temporary or permanent ground hazards that exist within your approved area.
So if you're inspecting a power line,
you'd put microfences around active road crossings or around work crews on the ground or over specific substations where electromagnetic interference is a known issue. They mitigate local risk without shutting down the whole corridor.
And finally, for long-distance linear BVLOS, the gold standard is cordal geofencing.
Right, or Strategy C. Quarters geofencing defines the route not as a series of points, but as a continuous tube of authorized airspace. This is mandatory for linear assets, pipelines, power lines, rail. It limits lateral wander significantly.
Like a hard shoulder.
It acts exactly like a hard shoulder, pulling the aircraft back. This ensures that even over vast areas, the drone remains contained above the assessed risk zone, making the whole mission auditable and predictable.
We've designed the perfect set of three rings, but those rings are meaningless if we don't know exactly where the center point is. Your geofence is only as trustworthy as your navigation truth source.
We need to talk about real-world imperfection, and that means talking about why you can never trust perfect GNSS.
This is so important. We must design for degraded performance days, not ideal days.
Even with RTK and all the modern tech.
Even with that. While modern systems give you centimeter-level accuracy, BVLOS risk management requires planning for the worst-case scenario. Let's look at the numbers, because this is where the planning gets critical. If we strip away all the correction services, what is the conservative standard we have to plan around?
The conservative baseline is pretty sobering. If you look at the U.S. GPS Standard Positioning Service, or SPS, published standards, they conservatively expect a 95% horizontal accuracy of around 38.2 meters under certain unfavorable assumptions.
38 meters.
38 meters. Now, typical global average performance is much better, maybe 8 to 15 meters for 95% error. But that's the worst case standard.
Wait, if I'm an operator and I just invested a ton of money in high-end RTK systems that give me sub-meter accuracy, are you telling me I still have to plan for a potential 38-meter error? That sounds operationally crippling.
This is a perfect point. It highlights the difference between performance and integrity. You don't necessarily plan your mission for 38.2 meters, but your regulatory safety case must acknowledge that if certain infrastructure fails, if you lose your RTK connection, your underlying unaugmented GNSS integrity could fall back to that conservative standard.
So the FAA demands, the maximum potential deviation.
They do. Your safety buffer must accommodate, at a minimum, the expected 95% error for your specific tech stack under your operational conditions. If you can't prove better than 8 meters, you must build an 8-meter buffer for GNSS uncertainty alone.
So we're planning for integrity, not just typical performance. And what environmental factors make that error even worse?
First and foremost is multipath reflection. This is the biggest danger in urban or complex infrastructure environments.
Signal bounce.
Signal bounce. The signal bounces off tall buildings, bridges, large metal wind farms, and arrives at the antenna multiple times, confusing the receiver and creating positional drift. You see it all the time in urban canyons. Second is terrain masking in mountainous areas, where your line of sight to the necessary satellites is just obscured, which degrades both accuracy and signal availability.
So the goal is to calculate an effective error budget that dictates the width of that safety buffer fence.
Absolutely. The golden rule remains. Never draw your fence right on the hazard, fence the safe area, and buffer aggressively.
And there's a formula for this, right?
A robust error budget has to accommodate multiple layered uncertainties. We use a simple formula. Buffer width equals regulatory margin plus GNSS uncertainty plus wind drift margin plus control latency distance.
Okay, let's walk through that. Regulatory margin is from your approved area. GNSS uncertainty we just discussed. How do we quantify wind drift?
Wind drift must be calculated based on the maximum certified crosswind for your aircraft. If your drone can tolerate 30 knots of crosswind and needs 5 seconds to correct a lateral push, you calculate the distance it could travel sideways during that correction, plus a safety factor.
And control latency distance.
That's the distance the drone travels during the cumulative delay. The time between the breach being detected, the decision to turn back being made, and the actual flight controls moving.
Even a 1-second delay matters.
A 1-second delay at 30 meters per second is 30 meters of unplanned travel outside your boundary. You have to account for that reaction time.
We focused heavily on lateral boundaries, but we can't forget that geofencing is 3D. Altitude fence discipline is just as crucial.
It is non-negotiable for adhering to the proposed low-altitude BVLOS framework, which generally restricts you to below 400 feet AGL. Altitude fences enforce the ceiling and the floor of your operating volume.
And this brings us to that classic altitude confusion point, AGL versus MSL.
This is a massive failure category. AGL, above ground level, is what matters for collision risk with the ground or buildings. MSL, means sea level, is what matters for interacting with manned airspace, which is charted in MSL.
And the confusion comes from the fact that the ground isn't flat.
Exactly. Standard barometric altimeters measure MSL, but the ground elevation is always changing. If your fence is set to 400 feet AGL over a flat field, that's simple. But if the ground elevation suddenly drops by 200 feet and your system isn't compensating, your AGL height just shot up dramatically.
How do modern systems try and resolve this?
Modern flight management systems try to fuse the data. They take the MSL data from the GNSS and barometric altimeters and compare it against a high-resolution digital terrain model, or DTM, that you load before the mission.
So it's constantly calculating the difference.
The resulting fused altitude solution is the most accurate representation of AGL. But your safety case has to document the resolution and integrity of that DTM to prove your AGL geofences are actually accurate.
Geofencing is software, and software is a hazard category.
It absolutely is.
Even the most perfectly calculated buffer can be undermined if the technical system fails in unexpected ways. Let's look at the high retention list of failure modes that serious BVLOS operators have to plan and train for.
This list should inform your entire testing and validation protocol. We've already covered GNSS issues, drift, and multipath, but the more insidious failures are often hidden in the planning process.
Let's start with the coordinate failures.
Coordinate mismatches. This is when there's a data mismatch between the map layer you used for planning and the autopilot's reference system. For example, planning the mission using NAD 83 coordinates on your desktop, but the autopilot is set to a default of WGS 84. The differences are often small, but over long linear routes, this mismatch can cause the entire geofence polygon to shift several meters from where you thought it was.
Wow, so that results in an immediate and unintended boundary violation?
And it's a common human-induced software failure.
And let's revisit altitude confusion, but as a failure.
Right, altitude confusion. If the terrain model is corrupt or wasn't loaded correctly, or if the barometric sensor is impacted by rapid weather changes, the fused solution can break down. And if the system reverts to an uncompensated MSL reading, the aircraft could descend right toward a ground hazard.
We also have communication-related failures like time sync issues.
Time sync issues are subtle but so dangerous. If the ground control station and the onboard system aren't perfectly synchronized, you can get stale fence updates or delayed telemetry.
So you're making decisions based on old data.
The aircraft is operating on a fence that's already minutes old, or the pilot is reacting to old positional data, leading to a late reaction to a boundary breach.
And the classic, you built a trap failure, lost link behavior.
This is where the aircraft executes its fail-safe routine, RTH, loiter, or land. But the automated path, while technically correct, takes the aircraft outside the approved geofence.
How does that happen?
Well, the RTH altitude might be set too high, so it enters an unapproved manned corridor. Or the RTH path is a straight line that intersects a restricted area. The aircraft does exactly what it was told, not what the pilot meant.
Finally, the rare but high consequence interference modes.
Spoofing or jamming. A successful GNSS spoofing attack can instantly give the FMS wildly incorrect position data, causing the aircraft to think it's hundreds of meters off course and trigger a violent incorrect geofence correction maneuver.
And you always have to watch out for firmware updates.
Always monitor for software regression. A new update, intended to fix something unrelated, might silently change how the autopilot interprets a fence boundary, requiring full revalidation before you fly BVLOS.
So given all these vulnerabilities, just trying to expand the fence mid-emergency is the worst possible thing you can do.
It is absolutely reckless. Expanding the fence in a stressful situation compromises your entire regulatory submission and risk assessment. You accidentally authorize yourself into new ground risks, dense populations, or controlled airspace you haven't surveyed.
So what's the professional strategy?
It's pre-authorized contingency geometry. You build the recovery zones into your operations plan from the very start, and you get them approved as part of the overall flight area.
The contingency box has to be more than just a vague zone.
It has to be precisely defined geometry. First, you have the contingency corridor. This is a narrow, pre-cleared, pre-surveyed path designed specifically to take the aircraft from a failure point to a safe recovery zone.
And you have to prove it's safe.
You have to detail the ground risk. No people, no roads, and the air risk low altitude separated from known traffic.
Okay, second is the hold bubble.
This is a predefined loiter volume. It has specific altitude bands and maximum time limits. The aircraft goes to this bubble if it can't land or RTH immediately, and that bubble has to have guaranteed comms resilience.
A temporary refuge.
Exactly, to wait for the link to recover.
And third, the descent box.
This is the predefined emergency landing area. It has to be clearly marked on your maps, programmed into the aircraft's logic, and critically, it aligns perfectly with the Part 108 emphasis on alternate landing considerations.
And the audit requirement is stringent.
You have to show documentation of ground surveys proving the descent box is clear of hazards, has clear approach paths, and is accessible for recovery.
So this harmonization requirement is paramount. If your RTH procedure doesn't respect the pre-approved contingency geometry, you failed the most basic BVLOS safety test.
That's right. If your return to home path takes you outside your approved fence, even for a second you built a trap. It's an operational failure and a legal contradiction.
All lost link logic must be tested and proven.
It must be proven to use the contingency corridor to reach the descent box or hold bubble, ensuring predictable containment even when the pilot has zero control.
Let's try and summarize everything into a checklist that elevates hobby safe to BVLOS safe, starting with the design philosophy.
The first, design best practice. Fence the mission, not the route. Routes change constantly based on data needs or weather. Your safe operating area, the approval box and safety buffer, must remain stable.
And always, use multi-layer buffers. We know the formula now. GNSS error plus wind drift plus control latency. That safety buffer is your most critical design element.
Also, separate risk fences. You should keep your lateral containment, which is the people risk fence, separate from your altitude and climb permissions, the air risk fence. This lets you apply different hard or soft rules where they make sense.
Design is only the starting line. The operational element is validation. You have to test these boundaries deliberately.
The validation checklist has to be comprehensive. SIM first, VLOS second, BVLOS third. You have to simulate fence behavior under various failure modes.
And you have to test it in real life.
Critically, you must test edge behavior. Fly deliberately toward the boundary under controlled VLOS conditions to confirm the hard fence triggers exactly when and how you expect it to. You need to see that the turnback is safe and contained within the safety buffer.
And testing degraded modes is essential for dynamic fences.
Yes. You have to simulate reduced GNSS quality, intentionally reduce link quality, or simulate a wind exceedance. You must verify that your dynamic fences respond predictably, pushing the aircraft to the pre-authorized contingency geometry without any hesitation.
Log analysis of those tests must be key for an audit.
It is.
Okay, in terms of daily operations, we come back to the core principle. Couple fences to lost link logic. Define behavior at each boundary.
Right. The intermission edge triggers a slowdown and an alert. The safety buffer edge triggers an auto turn back, and the outer regulatory edge triggers a critical RTH or emergency landing sequence into the descent box.
And for large infrastructure projects, you have to fence critical infrastructure with intent.
For linear assets, you need detailed proximity logic. Under the proposed BVLOS framework, you need to show you can safely manage close operations without compromising that containment zone. This means defining specific microfences around pylons or critical valves.
Let's apply this robust blueprint to our 3 core BVLOS scenarios. First, Scenario A, rural powerline corridor inspection. This is the quintessential linear BVLOS operation.
The strategy here must rely on robust corridor geofencing, that tube concept integrated with layered fences. We define the asset-aligned tube maybe 100 meters wide, but we need an enlarged lateral safety buffer of, say, 50 meters on either side to account for crosswind and variable GNSS.
Where does the complexity come in for this kind of scenario?
Exclusion zones and contingency planning. We add hard exclusion zones or microfences around any towns, schools, or busy roads that intersect the corridor.
And you need contingency spots.
Crucially, we define emergency hold bubbles pre-cleared at regular intervals, maybe every 5 miles, where comms resilience is confirmed. If comms degrade at mile 7, the drone is programmed to divert to the hold bubble at mile 5 and just loiter at a safe, low altitude.
Until the link is restored, or it has to land.
Or the battery mandates a descent into a pre-surveyed descent box within that node.
So the win here is predictability over vast distances.
Exactly. The combination ensures the mission is mature and aligns with Part 108 expectations for robust comms planning and hazard mitigation. Even a lost link scenario results in the drone staying within the safe, approved corridor.
Okay, next, scenario B. Urban medical delivery type constraints, high-risk environment, high population density.
This demands maximum sophistication, dynamic geofencing, and graduated railings. In high-density urban zones where GNSS multipath is high, your GNSS uncertainty buffer actually has to be wider, even if your mission box must be tighter.
So your approval box is much larger than your actual flyable tube.
Significantly larger.
How do you manage the complexity of urban verticality?
Altitude discipline is key. We use altitude stratification techniques. We assign the drone a strict operating band, maybe 150 to 250 feet AGL, leaving the space below for people and the space above for manned traffic. And you have to use high-resolution digital surface models, not just DTMs, to account for building height.
And the high consequence demands extreme diligence on the contingency side.
Absolutely. Because of the ground risk, you have to pre-authorize multiple, highly specific, and often smaller emergency landing sites, rooftops, designated parking lots inside the contingency box.
And you need documentation for each one.
Video, photos, hazard analysis for each descent box, including the required altitude for parachute deployment. The geofence logic has to automatically calculate the nearest, safest descent box based on its current position and remaining power.
The outcome is demonstrating that higher density requires wider uncertainty margins and stronger mitigations.
Yeah.
But the tight, layered geofence minimizes risk exposure.
It converts operational risk into geometric risk, which is auditable. The geofence becomes a way to limit your lateral exposure based directly on the population density of the area you're overflying.
Finally, scenario C, multi-drone mapping on a construction megasite. Here, the risk isn't external. It's managing internal separation and workflow.
The strategy is using internal separation fences. You take the main FAA-approved approval box for the whole site, and you split it logically into smaller sector railings for different contractors or different drone types.
And how do you separate them?
Primarily through altitude. We use altitude banding to set interfleet separation fences. Drone 1, the LiDAR scanner, is confined to a tube between 200 and 300 feet AGL. Drone 2, the visual inspection unit, is confined to 300 to 400 feet AGL.
The geofence becomes a tool for managing simultaneous operations.
And microfences are vital here too, defining dynamic exclusion zones around crane movements or concrete pours.
So geofencing is now a tool for organization and scalability, not just safety.
It is. It's a tool for auditable record keeping. The geofence ensures that each fleet maintained its designated flight path and altitude separation, providing concrete evidence for the site supervisor that you maintained required separation minimums.
Let's recap the core mnemonics to make sure these concepts stick. We started with the 3 vital containers: the geometric backbone,
BOX, 2B, booby BLE. The approval box, which is the regulatory max area, the mission tube, your specific flight corridor, and the contingency bubble, your lost link, loiter, or recovery zone.
and the high-level checklist mnemonic for operational discipline, F and ACE.
Right. Foresee hazards. Enclose the safe space. Never trust perfect GNSS. Contingencies pre-cleared and edge-tested before BVLOS. Master that, and you've mastered professional BVLOS containment.
So to synthesize this,
Geofencing is containment. It ensures the aircraft stays inside approved areas, away from known conflicts, it makes lost link behavior predictable, and it proves operational discipline as BVLOS scales up.
it's the primary way to convert the rules.
It's the primary way to convert abstract regulatory intentions, the requirement to stay in an approved area, into enforceable, auditable airspace behavior that stands up to scrutiny.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? It means that mastering BVLOS isn't about flying farther. It's about drawing better boundaries. It's about recognizing that the software guardrail is useless if you don't account for the inherent imperfection of the GPS signal, the chaos of the environment winds and multipaths and LGENs, and the human engineering required to pre-plan those robust contingency zones and buffers.
And we've established how geofencing is essential for predictable behavior, and that the proposed BVLOS framework is predicated on having strong comms coverage and procedures for lost comms.
Right.
Given that, here's something to think about. What unlisted hazard besides GNSS drift or spoofing is created when an operator over-relies on a hard geofence instead of improving their fundamental ground-based communications, resilience, and quality?
Interesting.
If that hard geofence provides a false sense of security regarding boundary breaches, what is the ultimate operational consequence when the comms link is lost before the geofence logic can even execute its turnback command? That's something to mull over as you transition from just planning a route to building a truly resilient remote operation. That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above, go beyond, get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.